Second Son, Book 2 of The Minstrel's Song by Jenelle Leanne Schmidt. Narrated by Benjamin Fife. Prologue. The young apprentice peered up at the sky, a puzzled look in his bright eyes. "But what does it mean, master? I don't understand." "2 sons. 2 sons? There have never been 2 sons in the house of Arn. Never." "Never, my boy, never. Have you lived since the dragon's eye was formed, then? Have you watched the line of Arn from the ancient days before their family acquired the throne? No? Then be silent with your idle words and keep your thoughts to yourself." The old man's voice became a thundering roar, and his apprentice hunched his shoulders against the storm. "You are right in one sense of the word, my boy." "How?" the boy asked carefully. "There has not been a second son in that line for a very, very long time." "The stars shoot sparks at his birth, master? Why?" "Do not put too much stock in the stars, my boy. They are fickle and distant, and do not affect the lives of men by very great a margin. I see that I shall have to unteach you much of what you have learned from your previous superstitious masters. The stars merely appear to spark more brightly now, because it is a clear night, and we are far away from other lights." "Then there is nothing special or extraordinary about this child, this second son. There's nothing to the old legends at all." "Nothing to the old legends?" The old man looked surprised. "I cast aspersion on one superstition, and you are ready to throw out all the old writings as well. Is that it, boy?" The youth looked properly chagrined, and made no further comment, waiting upon his master's words. The old man inclined his head approvingly. "You learn quickly, boy." "Thank you, Master Selwyn," the youth said humbly. "I know it is tiresome for you to listen to me prattle on about events that are not taking place here in Aom-igh, but the lives of those in faraway lands do affect our own. This royal birth in Llycaelon tonight is just as important as the coronation of our own young King Jerem tomorrow." "No, the lessons are not tiresome, master, just confusing, and there is so much I have to learn." "And much you have to unlearn. Both can be cured by listening and thinking, so rest easy knowing that there is nothing severely wrong with you." Selwyn laughed at the young man's expression. "Ah, Garin, you long more for the horse and the sword than for all this book-learning and magery. I understand that. But here, I will give you a gift." "A gift, master?" "Yes, a free answer to your endless questions about the child who is being born far away in the dark country. A prophecy, if you will." "A prophecy about this second son?" The old wizard looked down at the boy in something halfway between exasperation and amusement. "Do you listen to a word I say, boy, or do you not trust your own ears?" The boy looked down at his feet. "I'm sorry, master." "Very good. Listen closely, for I will not suffer myself to repeat the dark words of the Llycaelon prophecy." The look in the wizard's eyes became far away and distant. His voice evened out, becoming strong and soft. "In waning days of autumn gold, a shadow shall spread across the sky, A banner of darkness here foretold, yet a second sun that darkness defies. Born 'neath the sign of Orion's stars, he comes to turn the battle's tide. Wanderer he to shores afar, warrior he, the eagle's pride. Chapter 1. Rhoyan stared longingly through the windows at the bright blue sky. It was the first day of spring, and the weather was far too nice to spend indoors. He wondered where Kai was, and whether his older brother would bother to show up for class. The seasons had come full cycle 15 times since the second prince's birth, making him little more than a child according to the ages of those who lived in Llycaelon. Now, Rhoyan, recite to me the names of the House of Aom-igh and their meanings, the master said firmly. The House of Aom-igh, Rhoyan began, pausing as Kai entered the room. The master historian turned to fix his tardy pupil with a look of strict disapproval. Kai sat down in his seat and beamed up at the master brightly. The master sighed and shook his head. What is your excuse this time? Forgive me, Master Hobart, but Master Yevo made me stay at practice until I had hit the target perfectly 10 times in a row. A command you no doubt thoroughly enjoyed, Master Hobart grumbled. If you would pay half as much attention to your school studies as to your combat ones, you would go far, my boy, far. The master looked at both boys fondly for a moment. Now, back to the lesson, Rhoyan. The younger boy nodded dutifully and began again. Aom means eagle, the bold predator bird that stands for courage and pride. Aom was the first of our line, who inherited the throne from his cousin after the War of Hawks 800 years ago. Rhoyan continued on, reciting the names and major accomplishments of each of his ancestors until he reached his father, King Stiorn. Bravo, my boy, the master applauded. You have certainly been working on your lessons. That much is apparent. Now, what did you learn about family? Rhoyan brightened. This was part of every lesson, and the part he enjoyed the most. Master Hobart called it independent study, which meant that the student was required to discover something about his topic outside the actual guidelines of the assignment. I learned that the House of Aom has never suffered the lack of an apparent heir. There has always been a son, ever since King Aom I. Before him the line was often questionable, because there wasn't always a son born directly in the royal family. That's why Aom I came to the throne. He was the closest kin that King Etienne had. Very good, Rhoyan. I am impressed you caught that. Now, Kai, let us hear your report on the art and history of warfare. Rhoyan sat down, his brow furrowed. Usually, Master Hobart asked follow-up questions to the independent study. Rhoyan had been ready with far more information. He had learned something about himself in the study of his family's history, and he had wanted to share his discovery. He was the first second son to be born in hundreds of years. It didn't mean anything much, of course, but it was interesting, and he had been curious as to whether or not his teacher was aware of the fact. Rhoyan was always trying to find some information in his independent studies that Master Hobart did not already know, a challenge he usually failed at, but the fun was in the trying. He was a little hurt and puzzled over his teacher's lack of interest. However, when Kai was done, Master Hobart announced that he was cancelling the rest of their lessons for the day, and the excitement of the unexpected early release from school pushed the disappointment straight out of Rhoyan's head. Master Hobart was an understanding teacher, and he knew that any lesson taught on such a day as this would just have to be retaught later, and so the two boys were allowed to race out of the schoolroom and down into the kitchen much earlier than was normal. Free! Good feeling, eh, little brother? Rhoyan nodded enthusiastically. What are we going to do today, Kai? I thought maybe we could get Lita to pack us a lunch, and then go down to the caves along the shore and see what adventures we might have. Then perhaps when we get back, we could convince Master Yevo to give us an extra fencing lesson." Rhoyan nodded, content to let his older brother be in charge. They raced to the kitchens in search of the head cook. "Ah, me boys," she exclaimed as they dashed through the kitchen doors. "And what mischief will the two of ye be about today?" "Good afternoon, Lita," Kai said. "We were wondering if you could pack lunch for 2 dangerous warriors who are going on an expedition." "'Tis already done, dear prince," Lita said. "Master Hobart warned me this morning that ye two would be squirrely today." "Lita, you're the best," Kai said cheerfully, as she handed them 2 packs full of food. Lita patted Rhoyan's head kindly. "Run along now and be careful." The kindly cook watched in motherly affection as the 2 boys raced out of the kitchen. "Ah, those 2, eh?" The castle sat at the top of a tall, jagged cliff that plunged straight down into the water of the ocean, making it impossible to launch an attack from the sea. Any invaders would be forced to sail around to a harbor and then march inland, a disadvantage that had kept Llycaelon from ever falling to an enemy force from outside their borders. The cliffs below the castle contained an intricate maze of tunnels and caves that Kai and Rhoyan had claimed for themselves as secret hideouts. The 2 boys had spent countless hours in the caves exploring and playing, and they knew the tunnels better than anyone. The maze of tunnels wound in every direction, some leading out into the forest beyond the courtyards and stables, some leading to the cliffs and opening in yawning caverns that overlooked the ocean. There were many different ways to get into the tunnels. Some of the entrances were even inside the castle itself. The 2 princes had discovered an entrance in the armory, and they used this secret door often. They used it today, escaping into their private world. They spent the rest of the morning playing warriors among the twisted paths and great caverns. By the time they began to get hungry, both boys were covered in dust, and looked as though they had been rolling in the dirt, which they probably had. Rolling on the cave floors made it easier to hide, and added to the excitement of pretending to evade mythical beasts that were tracking them. Following the tunnel out into one of the largest of the caves, which was set approximately halfway up the cliff face, they opened their packs of food. The brothers sat companionably together as they munched on their food, their legs dangling 15 spans above the swirling water that foamed playfully up against the base of the cliff. "I'm famished," Rhoyan announced between bites. Kai nodded, his mouth too full to voice his agreement. "It's hot," Kai noticed aloud when he had swallowed. Rhoyan grinned impishly. "We could go swimming." Kai looked doubtful. "I don't know. Mother might get upset again." "She doesn't have to know, and she didn't exactly tell us not to." "She didn't have to," Kai said wryly. "And how do you propose explaining why we're coming home all wet?" Rhoyan shrugged nonchalantly. "I thought we could ask Master Yevo for an extra practice later, sort of before dinner." Kai's eyes lit up. "And we'd have to clean up before we came inside anyway, then. Little brother, you're inspired." Rhoyan flushed under the sudden praise and grew quiet. Kai finished his food, and the 2 boys stripped off their shirts and boots. Then they stood silently at the edge of the overhang, their stomachs fluttering more than either would ever acknowledge. They stared solemnly down at the breaking waves, pretending not to be afraid. The boys had done some careful rock climbing about a year ago, and had discovered that the cliff face below their ledge was easy to scale. The water at the base of the cliff was deep and unbroken by any jutting rocks, perfect for 2 young princes who wished to be adventurous. However, even after many similar experiences, leaping out into open air and sailing down into the dark water that splashed and gurgled in loud waves far beneath them was still a daunting proposition. Then, because he could stand it no longer, Rhoyan backed up, gave an ear-splitting yell, and ran off the edge of the cliff, plunging through the air and into the water below. Kai could not help but follow suit, and soon both boys were laughing and splashing in the cold and salty water. They played in the ocean and climbed the cliff and jumped into the water again and again, until the dragon's eye was nearing the horizon, and then they climbed the cliff face one final time. They dripped all the way back through the tunnels, shivering and giggling and remembering out loud the feats of the day. They sat down at the end of the tunnels to put their boots back on, and Rhoyan stared up at the sky, which was beginning to turn golden and purple. "Kai, do you think we'll get to go to the grand tourney this year?" "If Mother decides that we're old enough to watch. Father would have taken us last year, but she said we were still too young." "I wish we were old enough to be in the tournament." Kai's expression grew wistful. "Yeah, that would be great. We'd win all the prizes, and everyone would chant our names." A moment passed as visions of glory danced in front of each boy's eyes. Then Kai sat up straighter, a thoughtful look on his face. "Rhoyan, maybe Master Yevo would let us have a mock tournament this year, with the other pages and squires." "Oh, Kai, do you think he would?" "He might. I don't see why not. We'd only be using practice swords, not like the knights who use real weapons in the tournaments. And it would be a good learning experience for all of us." "That would be almost as great as being in the real tournament." "Well, we were headed over to the practice yards anyway. Let's go ask him now," Kai suggested. Rhoyan shoved his feet into his boots and grabbed his pack, running a little to keep up with his brother's longer strides. They arrived in the practice yards, panting and out of breath, and looking even more disheveled than they had before. The water of the ocean had washed away the previous layer of dirt, but their travels back through the tunnels while soaking wet had more than restored their layer of grime. "Master Yevo!" Kai called out to the gruff old arms master. The man turned from polishing his sword at the eldest prince's voice, and a smile broke out across his face. "Your Highness, and how are my two favorite students today?" He strode over and clapped Kai on the back, and tousled Rhoyan's hair. "Did you two come up here for an extra practice?" "Yes, we did, Master Yevo," Kai said, "but also to ask your opinion on an idea we had." "Idea? What idea?" Master Yevo asked. Kai outlined the idea for a mock tournament, and Rhoyan piped in with his own comments. When they were finished, Master Yevo tilted his head back and squinted up at the sky, as if lost deep in thought. He stood like that for so long that the two boys began to think he had frozen in place. They exchanged a nervous glance. "It's a good idea." Master Yevo's voice boomed out unexpectedly, startling both of the young princes. "A mock tournament would be a wonderful experience for the younger boys, and it would take some real dedication and practice to put it together. We can even have prizes for the champions like in real tournaments. A splendid idea." "Really?" Rhoyan asked. "You really like it?" "Like it? I'm surprised I didn't come up with it myself." The arms master clapped his hands. "It will be held at the end of new term, in 3 months' time." Thank you, Master Yevo," Kai exclaimed. "No, thank you, my boy." The seasoned warrior looked down at the young boys with affection. Then he looked serious again. "Now, about that extra practice." The two boys eagerly went to help each other into their practice armor. After retrieving their wooden swords, they returned to the practice arena where Master Yevo was waiting for them. "Practice makes perfect," Master Yevo boomed happily. Master Yevo loved it when his students asked him for extra lessons and practice, and he especially enjoyed watching Kai and Rhoyan spar. These two were his favorite students, and not just because they were the sons of his king. Both boys had an abundance of natural talent in every area of their lessons, and both boys had a love for learning and a work ethic that made them a pleasure to teach. As they warmed up, Master Yevo watched them with an eye of appraisal, comparing their skills and noting the strengths and weaknesses of each. In this way, he would be able to tell them what they needed to work on. Kai was the older and obviously the stronger of the two, but Rhoyan's small stature made him quick and light on his feet, and therefore difficult for his opponent to focus on. He darted about, never staying in one place long enough for Kai to take advantage of his greater strength. Kai often became frustrated when facing his brother. He was not used to the type of speed that his brother fought with, nor was he used to having to work for his victory. In addition to being quicker, Rhoyan was also the smarter swordsman of the two. His intelligence and speed saved him many a bruise on the practice field, but he lacked the aggression with which his older brother fought, preferring to simply defend. Yevo often found himself wishing that he could somehow meld the two boys into a single soldier. Together, the two boys were a matchless team, as the arms master had discovered the year before, when he had pitted groups of 10 or 12 of his students against the two princes. With Rhoyan's battle sense and Kai's aggression, passion, and strength, the other students had not had a chance. "It will be interesting to watch them mature into warriors," Yevo thought. Kai's ferocity with the sword could easily make him a very dangerous swordsman. Master Yevo hoped to teach the young prince to channel that ferocity and turn him into a deadly but controlled warrior. That spark of danger could not be found in Rhoyan. The younger boy was content to let his older brother be the leader, content to remain on the defensive, while Kai did all the attacking. The princes were good sparring partners, and they could learn a lot from each other. Master Yevo speculated to himself about which boy would be the greater swordsman. For now, Kai was the better of the two, but Rhoyan demonstrated undeveloped potential. Yevo shook his head. Both were very young yet, and only time would tell how skilled each would become. That they would both far surpass his own prowess, he never doubted. "Kai, Rhoyan, are you finished warming up?"
"Yes, Master Yevo,"
the two boys chorused dutifully. "Good. Come here, then." The brothers walked over to where their teacher was and stood at attention. Yevo studied them with a critical eye. He immediately spotted the obvious problems, though there were no glaring flaws. "Stance!" he barked suddenly. Both boys instantly went into their starting stances. Rhoyan hunched over, his left arm bent behind his back and his sword arm outstretched, his eyes focused upwards. Kai bent his knees slightly. His left arm was stretched out behind his back, and his sword arm was bent moderately at the elbow. Kai's eyes were focused straight ahead of him. "Rhoyan!" the swords master shouted, causing the boy to jump slightly.
"Yes, Master Yevo."
"You are hunched over as though you seek to run away and hide, and your eyes are fixed upon the sky."
"My opponents are all bigger than me, sir. I have to look up to see their faces. Besides, the smaller I am, the harder they find me to hit."
"And what happens when you have a growth spurt? I know that this is most comfortable for you right now, but it will no longer work for you when you grow to your full height, which could be considerable if you take after your father. You must learn to find a comfortable stance that will allow you to face any opponent you meet, and make it look as though you trusted your own skill. You are a prince. Strive to look like one." Rhoyan nodded. He did not take offense at the criticism. Both princes trusted Yevo's instruction enough to know he would never belittle them or shame them. All of his criticism was merely aimed at helping them improve their skills. "Knees bent. That is good, but not so much." Master Yevo nodded in approval as Rhoyan straightened his legs. "Arm behind back, yes, but extend it a little more for balance. Don't tie it up. And you want to be able to use it if you have to. Ah, yes, much better. You are overcommitting to your opponent. You must find your center of balance. Lean back slightly on your left leg. Very good. Practice that stance every night before you go to bed. Try to hold it longer each time, and your muscles will learn the feel until you no longer need to think about it." The master turned his attention now to Kai. "Your stance is nearly perfect." The boy beamed under the praise, but Master Yevo was not finished. "But your attitude is too cocky. You are relaxed, good, but you are standing as though you have already won. You are overcommitted to your opponent. Lean back a little more. Better. He made the two boys stand in their now improved beginning positions until he was sure that they had both learned the feel of it. You may return to the center of the arena now. We will practice blocking and then spar for a while. The boys sighed in relief to be allowed to move, and they walked quickly to the center of the practice arena. Master Yevo stood to the side and called out moves to first one boy, then the next, forcing the defender to practice blocking various attacks. Finally, the arms master called a break. Go get a drink of water. Then I'll let you spar freely for a little, but not too long, he said quickly. I am sure your parents would want me to give you time to clean up for dinner. The boys raced to the water trough, jostling each other in their haste. They returned to the practice arena with both faces and shirts dripping from having been unable to resist the temptation to splash each other. Master Yevo sighed to himself. He could remember what it was like to be young. All right, boys, one match then. As always, I will be watching and keeping your rank in mind. This match will not affect that rank, of course, since it is only practice. But don't let that affect your performance in any way.
What are our ranks right now, Master? Kai asked in curiosity.
You both rank the highest in your age groups, Master Yevo said, smiling.
Both boys exclaimed excitedly. Kai had just entered the Hawk group earlier that year, which meant that he was among the youngest of his group, and was fighting with boys up to 10 years older than he. Rhoyan, 5 years younger than his brother, was still in Gerfalcon group, and in the middle of his class age-wise. The two boys did not know it, but they had caused quite a stir among their tutors this year. The object of contention had been whether or not to let Rhoyan advance with his brother into the next age group. Master Yevo had argued the most forcefully against this route when it was suggested. At first, the other tutors had been confused as to his reasoning, but the old arms master was greatly respected for his long years of service to the king, and he had been listened to respectfully. When he had explained his reasons, the others had understood and presented his arguments to the king and queen, who also bowed to Yevo's wisdom.
First of all, no one has ever been allowed such a thing, Yevo had argued firmly, and secondly, if we allow the young Rhoyan to advance with his brother, what will happen at the rite of passage? Will you allow him to enter adulthood 5 years before his time? Will you have the two princes come of age at the same moment? Worse yet, will you put that burden on the young Kai, he who will soon enough discover that his role is not to be king, that he has been passed over in favor of his younger brother? How can you ask him to bear that? How can you ask either one of them to understand something like the prophecy at these young ages? Let Kai enjoy his coming of age. Give him that, at least.
The councillors and king had seen the wisdom of these arguments, and there had been no further discussion about the possibility of advancing Rhoyan into the next age group before his time, even though he had surpassed everyone in his rank in both his intellectual and battle studies. Master Yevo thought about these things as the two boys practiced. A loud noise drew the sword's master sharply out of his thoughts, and he looked up to see Kai helping his younger brother stand up. The sparring had ended, with Kai once again as the victor.
"Good match, little brother," Kai said, retrieving Rhoyan's sword for him.
"Better luck next time, eh?"
Rhoyan brushed the dust off his pants, his childish face lighting up at his big brother's praise.
"Someday I'll be as good as you, Kai," he exclaimed, "and then we'll stand at the front of the Aethelons, and all our enemies will drop their swords and run just at the sight of us."
Kai laughed.
"Maybe so, maybe so. Thank you, Master Yevo."
"Any time, young princeling, any time. You two are a pleasure to teach, and you both have enough skill to go along with your enthusiasm to make teaching you worth my while. Now get along home. Your parents will never forgive me if you sit down to dinner, covered with grime as you are."
The two boys quickly put their gear in its proper place.
"Race you?"
Rhoyan yelled as he began running across the yard.
"Cheater!"
Kai called as he started off after Rhoyan, laughing, his long strides allowing him to catch up quickly. Just before he overtook his younger brother, though, Kai slowed down. He panted hard, pretending to be running as hard as he could, but letting Rhoyan stay just a stride ahead. They crashed into the door, Rhoyan reaching it first by an inch.
"Beat you!"
Rhoyan exulted.
"You're just getting too fast, little brother."
"Young masters!"
The door opened suddenly, and the head attendant glowered down at them.
"I've told you before not to come running through this door. If you must race, race to a tree or a wall where you can't do any damage."
She did a double-take and covered her mouth with a lace handkerchief.
"Gracious me, you two are filthy. You must go and get cleaned up at once."
"Why?" Kai asked.
"Because there is company for dinner. How did you miss hearing about it? Oh, never mind. Just go wash and dress for dinner before their majesties see you and I get in trouble for it."
"Yes'm,"
the two boys said, looking properly contrite. The head attendant glowered suspiciously after them as they walked sedately away from her.
"I dare say you were out playing in those caves again," she called out. "I do hope that you realize how dangerous they can be. It is easy to lose your sense of direction when you're underground. It would be a pity if you got lost down there."
"Let's hang a bucket of water above our door tonight,"
Rhoyan whispered to Kai once they were sure they were out of earshot. Kai giggled and then sobered.
"No, she'd know it was us. She deserves it, though. Besides, no one knows those caves better than us, right, Kai? Lost. She just needs someone to boss around. Would be funny to see her get all wet. We probably shouldn't, though," Kai said.
Rhoyan grinned mischievously, and then turned serious himself.
"Wonder who's coming for dinner?" "Me too. And how come we didn't know about it?" "We'll have to tell Papa about the tournament,"
Rhoyan said, changing the subject abruptly again.
"Yeah."
The two boys cleaned up, dressed for dinner, and then they headed down to the large dining room. They only ate there when guests were present. There was a far less grand family dining room where meals were usually held. The king and queen preferred private meals whenever possible, safeguarding the precious little family time allotted to them. Chapter 2. When the two boys reached the dining room, they both immediately recognized their guest.
"Uncle Ramius!"
Rhoyan shouted at the sight of the sea captain, running and jumping into his uncle's arms and giving him an excited hug.
"Rhoyan, my boy,"
Ramius boomed.
"You've grown at least 3 inches since I saw you last. And Kai, why, you're almost a young man. Stiorn, what have you been feeding these two?"
The king beamed with pride.
"Only the best, Ramius, only the best. I wouldn't dream of expecting any less for the heirs to the throne," Ramius said.
"Did you bring us anything, Uncle Ramius?"
Rhoyan asked, excitement making him forget his manners.
"Rhoyan!"
Queen Fiora reprimanded her son. Rhoyan flushed with embarrassment at the rebuke.
"Quite all right, my dear little sister,"
Ramius reassured her. He leaned down and whispered loudly,
"As a matter of fact, I did bring you something, young princeling, though I must say you'll need to grow into it a bit."
Ramius grinned at the boy's obvious delight at his news.
"Dinner first,"
Queen Fiora said firmly.
"Aww."
Kai and Rhoyan groaned.
"Your mother is right, boys. Food first, and then presents."
Ramius winked.
"But we'll eat fast, won't we?"
The boys shared a conspiratory glance with their uncle, and Fiora rolled her eyes, as if to ask why she even bothered. Dinner was delicious, but Kai and Rhoyan barely tasted it in their excitement at the prospect of gifts. Uncle Ramius never disappointed them when it came to presents. He always brought something interesting. Ramius was a sea captain, their mother's older brother by a span of 20 years. The gruff, white-bearded captain had travelled to the end of the world and back, or so he claimed, and had more grand tales than he had hairs on his head. Queen Fiora called them tall tales, but Rhoyan and Kai had never been able to figure out what she meant by that. Ramius often told them of how he had been caught up in battles between other countries, how he had fought sea monsters, and had single-handedly slain a dragon, back in the days when dragons had still existed. His greatest pride had been when his sister married Stiorn, then prince of the realm, and he treated his nephews as if they were his own. Never having married, Ramius had always wanted a son, and he did his best to spoil his nephews. Fiora was therefore secretly glad that Ramius travelled so often and returned to port infrequently, though she loved her seafaring brother dearly. She worried sometimes, though, that Ramius so obviously favoured Kai over Rhoyan. What if Rhoyan was the fulfilment of the prophecy? The minstrel had cautioned them against jumping to conclusions, but Fiora often felt that everyone already had. This train of thought always made her think of what she had lost, and she quickly turned her attention back to the conversation before the pain in her heart became actual tears. When they finished dinner, the boys waited impatiently as their parents talked to Ramius. King Stiorn wanted to know about the condition of his ships, and what the weather was like this time of year in the harbours at the far east end of Llycaelon. He then asked about their trade routes with Llycaelon. Fiora had many questions about their hometown, who was overseeing the community now that the old overseer had died, and which of her old friends were still living there. Kai and Rhoyan soon grew bored of this talk, and they began to fidget in their chairs. Finally, Ramius noticed their antics. "How about those presents?" His question was met with a cheer from the boys, as they jumped out of their chairs and stood, waiting expectantly. Stiorn and Fiora shared an amused glance, for they were almost as curious as their sons. "First you, young Rhoyan," he said, pulling a long object out of his sack. "I'm sure it is much too heavy for you now, but if you use it in practice, it will strengthen your muscles, and you'll soon grow big enough to use it for real." Rhoyan unwrapped the object and shouted in joy as he pulled out a beautifully crafted sword, encased in an intricately designed scabbard. The sword itself was simple, with no decoration ornamenting its hilt, but Rhoyan loved the weapon at first sight. It was full-sized and far too heavy for Rhoyan to wield, but Ramius doubted the boy even noticed its weight. "Now, Kai," Ramius turned to the elder prince, "something that no warrior should ever be lacking, but you'll have to come outside for your gift." They all traipsed out to the stables, following Ramius. A young servant boy came out, leading a prancing, spirited golden horse. The great beast was spectacular. His proudly arching neck and flaring nostrils were an impressive sight that both excited and awed the young prince. "For me?" Kai asked breathlessly. Ramius nodded. "For you, my boy. The eldest prince ought to have a horse all his own. A good horse. A horse he can ride into battle on. I know you can have your pick of horses from your father's stables to ride, but I thought you might like one of your very own." Kai looked down at the ground and kicked at a rock with his foot. "Thank you, Uncle Ramius," he mumbled. "What's the matter, boy?" Ramius asked curiously. "Don't you like him?" "I love the horse, Uncle Ramius," Kai said, his eyes filled with admiration for the proud golden beast. "It's just that—" He trailed off, too embarrassed to continue. "The boy does not know how to ride yet, Ramius," Stiorn interjected, saving his son from having to explain. Ramius' face turned red, and he looked outraged. "The prince does not know how to ride?" The king shook his head. "He is young yet, Ramius." "But he is the eldest son of the king," Ramius all but shouted. "He ought to have learned how to ride long since." "He has been learning other things, brother. Riding has not been a part of either of their lessons yet," Fiora said quietly. "They will both learn soon enough."
I learned to ride before I learned to walk, as did you, Fiora. I'm surprised at you. I would have hoped, that you would have taken a better control of the young prince's education. He will be king one day. He needs to know things like this.
Fiora's brow wrinkled in consternation at that, but she did not attempt to correct Ramius. Few people knew that Rhoyan was the one who was slated to become king. Not even Kai and Rhoyan knew yet, so it was only natural that Ramius would expect it to be the other way around. It worried Fiora, though, and she usually tried not to mention the subject around either of her sons. Master Yevo was not the only one who was concerned about how Kai would react when he found out. The queen exchanged a worried glance with her husband, but he shook his head slightly, and she bit her tongue. Kai's face had grown redder and redder during the exchange.
"Will you teach me, uncle? I'm a fast learner."
Ramius' expression changed immediately from anger and outrage to one of pride and delight.
Of course, my boy, of course. It would be my pleasure.
"Right now?"
Kai asked excitedly.
"No, not right now," Fiora interjected quickly. "Ramius, it's nearly the boys' bedtime. I won't have you getting them all excited now. They'll never sleep tonight if you start giving riding lessons at this hour." "But, Mother,"
Kai began to complain.
"It's fine," Ramius said smoothly, smiling down at the young prince. "Tomorrow morning will be a better time to learn. Your mother is right. It will be dark soon anyway, and you don't want to learn to ride in the dark, or when you're tired."
"But we have lessons tomorrow," Kai complained, "and we have to start getting ready for the tournament. I won't have any time to learn to ride."
"Tournament?" Ramius asked.
"Oh, Papa,"
Rhoyan said suddenly.
"We forgot to tell you about the tournament. Master Yevo said that we could have a mock tourney for the younger boys who haven't achieved kestrel ranking yet. It will be just like a real tournament, with all the events, but not using real weapons. Don't worry, Mother. And, oh, Kai, if you learn to ride before then, you can even enter the jousting competition. I'll bet you could win it. Imagine. That would be so great. Can we, Father, can we? Master Yevo thought it was a great idea."
Rhoyan's words seemed to tumble over each other in his excitement at the combined prospects of a tournament and riding lessons.
"That's right,"
Kai verified his younger brother's tale.
"We asked Master Yevo about it today, and he liked the idea. But we forgot to tell you, what with the excitement of Uncle Ramius being here and all."
"That sounds like grand fun," Ramius boomed out. "And we'll see what we can do about making young Kai a master horseman before then, shall we?"
"Will you stay for the tournament, Uncle Ramius?"
Rhoyan begged. The captain rubbed his beard thoughtfully.
"When is it to be held?"
"In 3 months' time," Kai replied. "Will that be enough time for me to learn to ride?"
"I might stay. I just might," Ramius said.
Then he turned his attention to Kai.
"As for learning to ride, who knows? Some are born for it and others aren't. But you're a prince, and you're my nephew, so that should count for something. We'll soon see in any case. We start bright and early tomorrow morning."
The next morning dawned in a grey and drizzly mist. Kai was contentedly sleeping in his bed, happy to let the dragon's eye rise to greet the day long before he did. He was dreaming about the tournament and the prizes he would win, when a rough hand yanked him out of his slumber.
"What?"
Kai mumbled sleepily, and then yelped as he was plopped down onto the cold stone floor.
"Dawn has broken, and it's time for you to get up."
The gruff voice held a hint of laughter, but the tone was also firm and not to be argued with.
"Ugh!"
Kai groaned, as if in pain.
"Some fine warrior you'll make."
Kai wanted to argue that he would make an excellent warrior, if he could just open his eyes, but he had a feeling the argument would fall on deaf ears. His tormentor did not seem to be the sort that would sympathize with him bemoaning the loss of a few hours of sleep.
"Uncle Ramius?"
Kai asked groggily, as he began to get his bearings.
"Who in the blazes did you think it was, boy?"
I don't know.
Kai said, still trying to clear his thoughts.
"Why did you wake me up?"
He rubbed his eyes, and his vision began to clear.
"Oh, it's horrid out. Let me go back to sleep, Uncle Ramius, please. It's not time to get up yet."
"Do you want riding lessons or not?"
Ramius asked. Kai snapped to full wakefulness.
"More than anything."
"Then move your lazy self out to the stables as quickly as you can. Your horse awaits you, my prince."
And with that, Ramius left the boy to get dressed. Kai moved as quickly as he could. His boots gave him some trouble, but he yanked them on and galloped down to the kitchen, taking the stairs 2 at a time. As he raced by Lita, she handed him a pastry.
"Good morning, young Kai," she said, her eyes twinkling. "I had a feeling you'd be needing breakfast on the run today." "Thanks, Lita,"
Kai mumbled around a mouthful of delicious tartlet. He continued out to the stables where his Uncle Ramius was waiting. The horse was tacked up and ready to go, and Kai's enthusiasm suddenly wavered. The animal was huge, much bigger than Kai remembered from the day before. Its golden coat blazed in the morning light, and it was tossing its head in impatience and pent-up energy.
"Kai,"
Ramius said sharply,
"come take these reins. Today I tacked up your horse, but tomorrow you will learn to do it for yourself. A true horseman takes care of his own mount."
Kai approached the animal with growing trepidation. The horse loomed over him as he took the reins with a trembling hand. If the beast had wished to break free, that hand would not have put up 1 ounce of resistance. Kai almost hoped the horse would make a bid for freedom, and then he could go back to bed. He had never been very interested in horses. He had taken for granted that he would eventually learn to ride. Most Aethelons did, but he hadn't given much thought to it otherwise, assuming the ability would just come naturally.
"All right, you're ready,"
Ramius said, coming back from closing the stable door.
"Up you go."
Kai was not sure what happened next. He suddenly found himself on the horse's back. The horse snorted and tossed his head. Kai imagined the motion was made in irritation at his rider. Kai would have been all too happy to oblige the horse by getting down, but he was not sure how to go about getting off. As he was trying to figure out a way off the horse, and out of this predicament, Ramius slapped the horse and unclipped the lead rope that he had been holding. The horse took off at what Kai felt was a terrifying pace. It was, in fact, merely a trot, but Kai, afraid of falling, half slid, half leapt out of the saddle. The hard-packed ground hurt, and Kai was slow in rising. The horse stopped when its rider fell off and was now quietly munching on some grass near Ramius. Kai stood up and decided that he'd had enough, and he said so as he turned to go back to the palace. Ramius' hand on his shoulder stopped him in mid-stride. The hand could have been made of iron, and it gripped Kai's shoulder so hard it made him wince, and he cringed a little, trying to get away.
"Get back on the horse."
If Ramius' hand was made of iron, then his voice was steel.
"When you fall off, you get straight back on. I'll not let any nephew of mine be a quitter or a coward."
Kai looked up at his uncle, frightened more of the old captain than of the horse now.
"I don't want to."
He said the words as firmly as he could, but he could not keep the slight tremble out of his voice.
"Get back on the horse."
There was no arguing with that voice. Kai turned around and obediently allowed his uncle to help him mount once more. This time the horse sensed his fear. Though the animal was truly well-trained and broken to a rider, it was still young and had a high-spirited temperament. Additionally, the horse had been cooped up in a small stall in Captain Ramius' ship for several weeks, which meant that the creature was in no mood for riding lessons, and was quickly becoming frustrated with the humans, who were trying to make him stand still and go at a slow and sedate pace. Thus, as soon as Ramius let go of the reins this time, the horse did not break into a trot, but burst into a full-out run across the pasture. Unprepared for such sudden speed, Kai was left behind. He hit the ground rolling.
Use your knees next time, boy,
Ramius shouted as he chased after the horse. He brought the horse back to where Kai was sitting and glared down at him, his eyes looking as stormy as the seas he sailed.
I saw you bail out the last minute, the sea captain said in a tight voice. Now get back on, and this time stay on.
Kai wiped away the tears that were beginning to form and attempted to get back on the horse. But by now the beast was prancing around wildly and tossing its head, making it impossible for Kai to even get his foot in the stirrup. He sighed and looked at his uncle in frustration, his eyes begging for mercy. Ramius shook his head and threw the boy up on the horse. "Hang on with your knees," Ramius instructed, handing Kai the reins. Kai nodded and tightened his grip on the reins. Ramius let go of the horse, and Kai tensed, waiting for the horse to take off again. But the horse merely stood still, looking about as though bored.
"Give him a little kick,"
Ramius yelled out encouragingly. Kai nodded stiffly and tapped the horse lightly with his heels. The horse jumped forward stiff-legged and then bucked, sending Kai flying over his head. The boy landed on his face and began to sniffle harder. Ramius grabbed the horse's reins and yanked the boy to his feet. "Stop crying and get back on. You'll ride this horse, if it's the last thing I do." Kai squeezed his eyes shut and wished his uncle to the bottom of the courtyard well. When he opened his eyes, he was back on the horse. The next few tries went in a similar manner, and Kai was now crying in earnest. The tears obscured his vision, and he had no energy to even attempt to stay on the horse any more. He just hoped that the horse would throw him hard enough to break something, and then maybe his uncle would leave him alone. Any desire to learn how to ride had vanished. Finally, the torture stopped. Kai was sitting numbly where he had landed the last time the horse had thrown him, when he heard his uncle mumble something that sounded like defeat. Kai looked up, his tear-stained face streaked with the dust of the paddock. The old sea captain stared down at the boy, and then shook his head and threw up his hands.
"Completely worthless,"
he growled savagely, then turned on his heel and walked away, leaving the desolate boy sitting on the ground. As soon as Ramius was out of sight, something shattered within Kai, and he began to sob. Never before had he been so humiliated. He had never failed so utterly at anything in his entire life. His humiliation slowly turned to anger. His wounded pride flared up and laughed at him. Rage began to grow inside of him. He was angry at everybody. He was angry at the horse that would not let him ride, angry at his parents for letting Ramius talk him into riding lessons, angry at his brother for still being asleep, and angriest of all at Ramius, who had witnessed his defeat. Slowly, the shards of his shattered pride hardened and froze into bitter icicles. He stopped crying. Kai wiped his eyes on his sleeve, a determined look on his face. He stood up and walked purposefully towards the horse. At Kai's approach, the creature flicked an ear unconcernedly, as if to say,
"Oh, it's you again."
Kai took hold of the reins, and there was a new strength in his grip that made the horse toss its head in surprise. Kai stepped firmly into the stirrup and mounted clumsily but decisively. He then grabbed a handful of mane along with the reins and dug his heels into the horse's sides. Taken by surprise, the horse reared slightly, but Kai held on, gripping instinctively with his knees and clutching at the reins. The horse took off at a gallop with Kai clinging to its neck. After several laps around the meadow, training began to take hold again, and the horse calmed down. Slowing its pace, it was ready now to acknowledge the small creature on its back as master. Kai gave the horse a few experimental commands, to which the animal responded perfectly. Kai sighed and relaxed his death grip on the reins, satisfied that the horse had accepted him and would now obey. When the young prince had ridden several more laps, he glanced at the palace. He could see his father and uncle standing outside talking. A hard glint came into his dark eyes.
Worthless,
Kai muttered to himself.
I'll show you worthless.
Kicking the horse into a controlled canter, Kai made his way up to the gate where his father and uncle were standing. Kai aimed the horse at Ramius and kicked his steed into a full gallop. His senses felt clogged, as though gauze had been wound around his head. He saw and heard nothing but the derisive look that had been on his uncle's face when he uttered the word worthless. Kai was completely focused on his goal, intent on trampling his uncle beneath the flashing silver hooves. The horse raced towards the captain, but Ramius merely stepped to one side and grabbed the reins as they flew past, halting the horse mid-stride, and nearly causing Kai to topple out of the saddle again.
Kai!
King Stiorn's voice was thunderous. Ramius held up a hand to stop the king from further outburst.
It is my own fault, my liege.
Yes, Stiorn's face was dark.
I saw, but that does not excuse impertinent or uncontrolled behavior. Kai is my son, and he is a prince of the realm, and that means his behavior must be exemplary, especially since his younger brother is still very young and impressionable. Kai, you know Rhoyan watches everything you do. You must think about what kind of example you are setting for him. No matter how you are treated, you must control your own actions. Now, apologize to your uncle. Kai's expression became more and more abashed as his father spoke. The weight of what he had just tried to do, what he had wanted to do, hit him, and the shame of it reddened his face, and made him wish once more that he was back in his bed. He slid off the horse.
What sort of monster am I?
He wondered miserably.
I'm sorry, Uncle Ramius,
Kai mumbled quietly.
I should not have lost my temper. I hope that you will forgive me. You can take the horse back. I don't deserve him.
Stiorn nodded in approval. Ramius acknowledged the apology with a slight lifting of his eyebrows. Then he pursed his lips and sighed.
No harm done, he said gruffly. It takes more than that to upset this old sea captain. Why, it reminds me of the time I was... Kai.
Stiorn interrupted before Ramius could start on another of his tales. Go wash up and wake your brother. Master Hobart will be waiting for you both to attend class for your lessons in mathematics and literature, and I don't want to hear of any tardiness today. We'll discuss whether or not you get to keep the horse later.
Yes, sir,
Kai said quietly. He was nearly out of earshot when Stiorn spoke again. His voice was low and angry. I saw that sorry excuse for a lesson, Ramius, and if you ever treat one of my sons that way again, I swear I'll... Stiorn's voice lowered even further, and Kai never did learn the rest of his father's threat, but his steps became lighter as he led his horse to the stable. His father had seen and understood. Rhoyan was already up by the time Kai made it back to the palace to wash up. The younger prince was full of energy and excitement about the riding lessons, though he was bitterly disappointed to have missed out on the fun.
Did Uncle Ramius teach you how to ride?
Rhoyan asked exuberantly, not noticing the grim expression on his older brother's face.
No, Kai replied. I taught myself. Now get ready for class. Master Hobart is waiting for us both.
Rhoyan bounced out of bed and grabbed his tunic.
You taught yourself?
He pulled the shirt over his head and began shoving his legs into his pants.
Uncle Ramius must have been impressed. Oh, will you teach me to ride, Kai, will you? I bet you'll be the best rider in the country. I bet no one will ever beat you in a race, even if all you had was an old cart horse to ride.
Rhoyan was bounding around the room and trying to put on his boots at the same time. He careened into a table, nearly upsetting it, talking the whole time.
I don't want anyone to teach me to ride but you.
Kai had to bite back a grin at Rhoyan's chatter.
If you don't stop bugging me, I won't teach you anything, ever. Now come on.
Rhoyan fell silent at his brother's command, and Kai glanced at him in concern to see if he was hurt. He nearly burst out laughing at the sight that met his gaze. Rhoyan had one hand firmly clamped over his own mouth. "Okay," Kai relented, glad that Rhoyan had not been offended by his comment. "I'll teach you to ride. You can talk if you want." He reached over and tousled his little brother's hair, silently thanking him for his innocence. Rhoyan beamed in pleasure, and chatted all the way down the stairs and out the door and into the library about how famous they were going to be for their riding skills someday. Chapter 3. The day of the tournament dawned bright and clear. Rhoyan woke up early and stayed in bed for as long as he could stand it, which was about 5 minutes, before jumping out of bed and dashing across the hall to Kai's room. "Kai," Rhoyan whispered, opening the door just a crack. Even in his excitement, he knew better than to wake his older brother, should he still be asleep. No answer came from the lump on the bed, so Rhoyan quietly closed the door and tiptoed away. He heaved a sigh of bitter disappointment, and paced back and forth in front of the door, bored and restless. He went back to his room and stared dolefully at his bed. Knowing he could not go back to sleep, he pulled out his sword and began practicing his routine. For 3 months, Rhoyan had been practicing his swordsmanship in his room late at night before bed. He had been using the sword his uncle had given him, and it was slowly building up his arm strength. He had also begun training with both hands. He was getting to be nearly as good with his left hand as he was with his right. Rhoyan ran through the other exercises Master Yevo had taught him to help build up both his stamina and his strength. The young prince had always been the best in his rank, mostly because he had more innate skill and speed than the rest of the boys in his age range. But now Rhoyan was determined to add hard work to his raw talent. Part of his new enthusiasm was due to his classroom studies. The young prince had been studying the Great Wars and the ancient Llycaelon heroes this year in Master Hobard's class. The stories and histories had sparked in his young mind a love for the tales of battle and a deep respect for the warriors of old. A desire to become one of those heroes had begun to grow within the young prince. Master Hobard was thrilled with Rhoyan's sudden interest in history, though he suspected the prospect of a tournament had more to do with it than anything he was doing as a teacher. The old master did not mind, though. The boy was learning. That was the important thing. Kai continued to be a reluctant attendant in the classroom, but he went to every class for 2 reasons. The first reason was that his father had ordered him to. The second, and perhaps the more significant of the 2 in Kai's mind, was because Captain Ramius had begun to take over the boy's warrior training, and he threatened to make him clean stalls if he so much as thought about missing class. Although he found it hard to forgive his uncle after his riding lesson, he still respected him, and if their relationship was strained by Kai's humiliation in the pasture, it was strengthened by Kai's respect for Ramius' experience with weapons. Kai struggled with a dichotomy of feelings when it came to his new tutor. He longed for his uncle's approval, even as he resented his need for it. He sometimes missed the laid-back, friendly relationship they had once had, but the rift formed by the riding lesson made going back impossible. "You need to learn your country's history, adding sums, reading, writing, rhetoric, and you especially need to learn about government and how this country is run. Now, don't argue with me, boy. You will be king one day, do you hear? These are things you will need to know." The gruff captain had made it clear that there would be no debating the point, so for the first time in his short life, Kai had a record of perfect attendance in Master Hobard's classroom. "Rhoyan, you up?" Kai whispered from the doorway. Rhoyan halted his practice and sheathed the great sword at his brother's voice. He walked over to the door, barely able to contain his excitement. "Kai, finally!" "How long have you been awake?" Kai asked. Looking at Rhoyan with a discerning eye, he took in the fact that his little brother was fully dressed, flushed and breathing hard, as though he had been running or exercising.
"An hour or so?"
Rhoyan said, shrugging.
"I couldn't sleep any more. The tournament's today." "Looks like you've warmed up already. We should go down and get some hot breakfast. We don't want to perform on empty stomachs."
They headed down to the kitchens. Queen Fiora was sitting at a table with Lita when they arrived. She beckoned for them to join her.
"My two fine warriors,"
she said, giving them each a hug.
"I knew you would be too excited to sleep, so I came down here early to ask Lita to prepare you some breakfast."
"Thank you," Kai said, looking at the spread before them. Lita had prepared them a wonderful breakfast, but they soon discovered they could not eat very much. Their stomachs were jumping around in nervous and excited anticipation. Fiora smiled understandingly.
"You'll be hungry enough after the tournament," she said. "Let's go check on our armor," Kai suggested. "I'll have to get ready as well," Fiora said. "I won't get to see you until after the tournament, I'm sure. Let me look at you."
They stood, and she stared at them, a pride and love mingled on her face.
"Fit to be kings," she announced. "I can't believe you're both growing up so fast."
She embraced them both and kissed their foreheads.
"Mother,"
Kai pretended to grimace, but then he hugged her back.
"All right. I know I can't keep you here any longer. Go on. Work out some of your restlessness. I'll be cheering for you."
The stables and armories were already a bustle of activity. Many of the other boys were already there doing last-minute polishing and running through their mental lists of things that needed to be done before they competed. Rhoyan checked his armor, but polishing it again would have been a waste of time. He could already see his reflection in the shiny black shoulder pads and breastplate. He checked his weapons next, stringing his longbow, testing the edge of his sword, and hefting his daggers to make sure their balance was still perfect. During the contests where the students would actually be sparring, they would be using blunted practice weapons. However, there would also be a weapons and armor presentation and inspection ceremony at the beginning of the tournament, and Master Yevo had threatened that anyone who had spent no time cleaning or polishing would be sent away from the tournament with strict instructions on how to care for his belongings. "I will find other things for you to do during the tournament," Master Yevo had said, "and believe me, you won't enjoy them." When he had satisfied himself that everything was in order, Rhoyan went and looked at the schedule on Master Yevo's door, even though he had already committed it to memory earlier that week. His first competition would be in the archery contest, then in staff fighting, then in knife throwing, then in hand-to-hand combat, and finally in the test of the sword. Rhoyan was glad he and Kai were entered in different ranks, because it meant their matches were at different times, and he could watch his brother compete. He did not mind facing Kai, but he would rather watch his older brother compete. This was partially because he enjoyed cheering for his brother, and partially because he enjoyed learning from the mistakes Kai's opponents made, without having to acquire bruises and scrapes by making them himself. Rhoyan was in the Gerfalcon rank, the youngest of the classes, while Kai was a hawk. This tournament was restricted to Gerfalcon and hawk rankings. Kestrels, raptors, falcons, and the Aetoli were all eligible for the real tourneys. In those, actual weapons were used and money could be won from the loser of a match. Also, the matches were sometimes held between two warriors who were in an argument over something. The king and queen allowed this type of competition to take place within the tourneys, because a tournament was a convenient way for such disputes to be worked out without bloodshed or long-lasting family feuds. Real tournaments could also last for up to several weeks, depending on how many men entered, whereas this tournament would only last a day. Kai was entered in all the same contests as Rhoyan, with the addition of jousting. Ramius had declared the boy a good enough rider to enter this contest. He cautioned the young prince not to get his hopes up, though. "You're good enough to hold your own, but you're not good enough to win any prizes yet," Ramius had said. "Remember, you'll be fighting lads who have been doing this all their lives.
Lots of these boys were practically born in the saddle, so don't get too discouraged if you lose more than you win this time. Your ability to even enter this contest after only 3 months of riding is a stunning accomplishment by itself."
Kai had nodded to show that he understood, but deep in his heart he longed to prove his uncle wrong. Kai joined Rhoyan at Master Yevo's door and glanced at the lists. "We're starting. Come on, you don't want to be late. Your rank is presenting arms first." Rhoyan wiped sweating hands on his tunic and turned to his brother, his eyes filled with worry. "What if—" His throat was suddenly very dry. Kai put his hands on Rhoyan's shoulders. "You'll do fine," he said slowly and clearly. "I'll be standing on the sidelines, watching and cheering for you. Just relax, Rhoyan. It's only a tournament, not a matter of life and death." Rhoyan managed a shaky laugh. "We should get out to the arena then." The boys marched into the fanfare of trumpets, dressed in their armor and bearing their weapons. The inspection was merely for show, but Rhoyan knew Master Yevo was taking mental notes. After the inspection, they filed out of the arena, leaving Master Yevo standing alone. He addressed the crowd and gave a brief introduction to the audience. He explained the rules and guidelines of the tournament and praised the boys for how hard they had been working. Then he announced that there would be medals and ribbons for the winners of each contest. A murmur of excitement rippled through the boys at this, for it was an addition to the tourney they had been unaware of. Then Master Yevo announced the archery contest and walked to the side of the arena, from where he would observe the contests. The judges of the events took their places around the ring as the gerfalcons lined up. They did not wear armor for this contest. Instead, they wore their family colors. As each boy entered the ring, his family let out loud cheers and called out words of encouragement. Rhoyan lost his nervousness the moment he entered the ring. He found himself suddenly calm and focused under the eye of the audience, his entire thought on the target. He barely even noticed his family cheering for him. The only thing he could think of was that he was glad he did not have to wear armor for this contest, because it was hot in the arena. Rhoyan loved it when he got to wear the colors of the royal house, maroon, silver, and black. His shield bore the family crest, 2 triangles meeting to form a square. The top one was silver, and the bottom one was maroon, with a black eagle soaring across the center of the crest. His shirt, however, bore his own personal crest, a tongue of flame leaping out of a cluster of stars. Rhoyan's turn to shoot came. He approached the line drawn in the sand with a casual stride that belied the anxiety he had been battling all morning. Focused only on the target, he chose an arrow. In his bubble of calm, he told himself this was mere practice, and he hit the bullseye dead center. The crowd cheered, and Rhoyan walked back to his spot in line. None of the other boys hit the center of the target, so Rhoyan was pronounced winner of the contest without having to face a rematch. The rest of the contests followed a similar fashion. The only test that gave Rhoyan any amount of trouble was that of hand-to-hand combat. Being smaller than some of the older boys, Rhoyan could not depend on strength to defeat his opponents. He had to outthink and outmaneuver the other boys, which he managed to do by a stroke of luck in his final match. The last boy he faced was 5 years Rhoyan's senior, one of the oldest gerfalcons and much stronger than the young prince. Rhoyan relied on his speed and only won the match because the older boy was overconfident. A swift kick to the legs brought the older boy down, and Rhoyan managed to pin his shoulders to the ground for the 5 count. Rhoyan was glad when that particular competition was over, as was Kai. The older prince had been watching all the events, but the hand-to-hand combat was the only one that made him nervous. He was confident that Rhoyan could hold his own in all the other areas of combat, but hand-fighting could be dangerous for the younger, smaller boys. When the event was over, Kai breathed a sigh of relief and cheered at the top of his lungs. Rhoyan's best event by far was the test of swordsmanship. With all of his extra practice, the heavier sword, and his experience sparring with Kai, none of the other boys could even hope to match the young prince's skill. He won the event easily. Even Kai was surprised at his brother's skill. At the end of the contests, Rhoyan had won every event and was given the title Champion Gerfalcon and awarded the Dragon Medal for his display of unmatched skill. The medal was a cheap imitation of the awards that were given out at the higher tournaments, but for the pride that Rhoyan felt at its presentation, it could have been real. When he left the arena to join the crowd, Kai was waiting at the gate to congratulate him.
"Rhoyan!"
Kai waved him over. Rhoyan went over to where his older brother was standing and showed him the medal.
"It looks real,"
Kai whistled.
"You were amazing. How did you stay so calm? You were all nerves before the competition." "I just told myself it was practice, and the crowd disappeared." "I don't know if I can go out there. I'm starting to shake." "You'll be fine the second you enter the arena. Just remember that I'll be right here."
Rhoyan echoed the words that his brother had said earlier.
"Thanks."
The Hawks were presented, and they entered the arena to the cheers of their families and friends. The contests went in the same order as the Gerfalcons, except that jousting was the last event. Rhoyan watched and cheered loudest of all as Kai competed in each event. There were moments of worry, as Kai faced opponents up to 10 years older than him, and Rhoyan found himself closing his eyes at moments. He needn't have worried, however. Kai had always been something of a prodigy when it came to the skills of a warrior. As the end of the day drew near, Kai had won every event in his rank. The only event left was the jousting. It was a great achievement for the boy, being among the youngest in his age rank, and the crowd recognized this achievement and appreciated its implications. Rhoyan was nearly bursting with pride at Kai's display of skill in all the areas of combat. He was impatient for the jousting event to begin, though. He knew it was the event that worried Kai the most, and though he had every confidence in his brother's skill, he was still anxious about it. Finally, the call to mount up was given, and Kai faced his first opponent. The two horses galloped at each other, their riders each holding their practice lances and trying to judge each other's weakness. Kai hit his opponent straight on the shield, and was hit himself just below the center of his shield. His opponent's lance shattered, and he rode down to the end of the row, where the monitor handed him a new one. On the second pass, Kai was more confident and threw his weight into his hit. His lance struck the other boy squarely, throwing him back in his saddle, but the boy stayed on his horse. On the third pass, Kai positioned his lance just below the center of the shield, and tilted his weight up, this time lifting his opponent from the saddle and sending him flying off his horse. Rhoyan jumped up from his seat excitedly, feeling a sudden release of nervous anxiety as he cheered for Kai's victory. After that, Kai's confidence grew with every opponent he challenged. However, Kai was new to the sport, and the strain of the intensity began to show. He had faced almost half of the boys in his age group when it happened. The boy Kai faced for his next round was a final-year Hawk. The boy was much bigger and stronger than Kai, as he was nearly 10 years older than the prince. His family was known throughout the land for their horsemanship and their lances. Rhoyan recognized their family crest, a rearing golden stallion on a red and purple background, and he held his breath. Kai sent his horse into a gallop towards his opponent, full of confidence and assurance. Rhoyan wanted to warn his brother to be careful. He wanted to tell Kai not to be overconfident, for here was an opponent whose skill and experience surely surpassed Kai's. On the first pass, they hit each other squarely on the shield. Kai's lance broke on impact, and he removed his hand from his shield to shake it, as the monitor handed him a new lance. On the second pass, both lances shattered. Each boy was throwing his entire weight and skill into this, the final competition of the day. On the third pass, Kai went flying. It was not a bad fall, but as the prince slowly stood up, Rhoyan knew that Kai's wounded pride and dignity was what hurt the most. The elder prince shook his opponent's offered hand graciously. Although it had taken the older boy until the third pass to send Kai flying off his horse, Rhoyan could tell the defeat still stung. Kai was given first-place ribbons for every event he had won, but he won no ribbon for the jousting competition, and the disappointment showed on his face. He was still declared the victor of the Hawks, and given a Griffin medal for winning every event except one. There was no champion announced in the Hawk ranking, for that honor was reserved solely for the rare occasion in which one competitor took first in every competition. Rhoyan tried to console his brother, pointed out how well he had done, and how many opponents he had defeated, but Kai merely sighed.
"I didn't even last the whole match," he mumbled disconsolately. "I only made it halfway through." "But it's your first time jousting for real," Rhoyan insisted. "You should be proud that you beat as many as you did. You only lost to Sinfarth, and he won the whole event, so who knows, if you'd faced him last, you might have taken second." "I guess," Kai shrugged. "I just got my hopes up too high. Maybe next year." The two brothers returned to the ringside to hear the closing ceremonies. The festivities were nearly over. All that remained was the feast that would be held out in the gardens. Master Yevo stood up to declare the end of the tournament when the crowd began chanting something. The demand grew louder and louder until the whole arena was filled with the cry. Master Yevo cast an alarmed glance at the king and queen, hoping for help, but they looked as shocked as he. The crowd was calling for a match between brothers, the two champions of the day. Yevo grinned at the boys. Kai and Rhoyan had heard the chant, and by the looks on their faces it was obvious that the idea had captured each of their imaginations. The brothers had not sparred in the past 3 months, ever since they had proposed the idea for the tournament. Each had been intent on honing his own skills, and although they had both practiced hard, they had not had time to spar with each other. Though this unexpected demand from the crowd worried him slightly, Yevo himself could not help feeling a little curious. He had been teaching both boys, but he was not sure which one of the two was now the better swordsman. Rhoyan had improved significantly in 3 months, while Kai had focused far more on his riding and jousting skills. After a few anxious moments, curiosity won out over prudence. Ignoring the little voice in his head that was shouting, "Beware! Beware!" Yevo nodded to the crowd in agreement. Then he motioned Kai and Rhoyan back into the ring. They strode over to their instructor, barely containing their excitement. Yevo raised a hand, and a hush fell over the stadium. Then he looked at the young princes. "If either of you are too tired from the day's activities, you don't have to do this," he whispered, half hoping that one of the boys would take this opportunity to back out. He knew it was a foolish wish and a feeble one, but it was the only way he could see to get out of this predicament now. Of course, as Yevo had known deep down, neither boy accepted the offer. They both shook their heads vigorously and exclaimed that they were not in the least bit tired. "The test of the sword, then," he announced to the crowd. "The sword is the weapon of kings, the weapon of warriors. It is the preferred weapon of the Llycaelons. Both of these boys are truly skilled in the use of this weapon, this art, as they have already proven before you today. And both of these boys will one day raise their swords to defend their country. Now, we will test their skills to the utmost as these two champions face each other in friendly combat for the final prize of the day." Kai faced his little brother, his distress at losing the jousting match falling away from him as he let himself relax. The sword had always been Kai's preferred weapon, and its familiarity helped him forget his previous failure. Both boys grinned at each other eagerly.
"This is to be a friendly match, boys," Yevo said quietly. "You both know the rules. Disarm your opponent, or be in a position to deliver the death blow, and you win the match." The boys nodded, and then Rhoyan focused on the exercise, his excitement mounting. Kai raised his sword, and Master Yevo returned to his spot outside of the arena. He nodded to the judges, who signaled back that they were also ready. King Stiorn raised his wife's handkerchief, as he had done for all the other contests. He glanced at Yevo, worry and concern in his eyes. Yevo gazed back steadily. Stiorn shrugged, as if to say, "I hope you know what you're doing," and dropped the handkerchief. As the handkerchief dropped, Rhoyan felt a surge of nervousness. What if he was the winner? He had never bested Kai with the sword before, but Kai had not been practicing as hard as Rhoyan had these past months. He had no desire to heap yet another defeat on his older brother's shoulders. Then Kai attacked, and Rhoyan had no more time to worry. The older prince gripped his sword with both hands and swung it in an arc over his right shoulder, and then chopped down at Rhoyan's left arm. The crowd gasped in appreciation of this aggressive first move. But Rhoyan had not sparred with Kai so many times and learned nothing. He knew Kai's fighting style by heart, and blocked this first blow easily. Yevo settled in to watch the fight, and took advantage of this unexpected opportunity, using it to study the two boys once more. Pride welled up within him as he watched Rhoyan. The boy had grown in the past 3 months, and was much stronger than he had been. There was something special about Rhoyan's fighting style that the arms master had not noticed before. The young boy was suddenly proving himself to be very observant. Rhoyan studied his opponents, not consciously, but almost without thinking, and he seemed to have a knack for noticing every detail. Yevo had perceived this in Rhoyan's matches against his own rank mates, but now that he had the opportunity to focus his full attention on the boy, he realized how well this ability served the young prince. Of anyone, Rhoyan knew Kai's fighting style the best. He blocked most of Kai's attacks, almost lazily, knowing from Kai's stance and eyes where each blow would fall, almost before Kai had even followed through. The fight continued on, speed and ferocity growing in each of the boys. The feeling of anticipation and thrill was growing in the crowd. But the younger prince had still not moved into an attack position. He seemed content to stay on the defensive and allow his opponent to make all the mistakes. Or perhaps he is afraid of beating Kai, Yevo thought to himself. As soon as the thought occurred to him, he realized it was correct. Rhoyan was working very hard at not winning this match. Kai was the young boy's hero, and added on top of that, Rhoyan had never once truly beaten Kai in anything other than his indoor studies, but Kai never seemed to mind that. The drama in the middle of the arena was intensifying, forcing Yevo out of his musings. The two boys whirled and slashed and blocked and sliced at a blinding pace. Or rather, Kai whirled and slashed and chopped, while Rhoyan blocked. The whole crowd was mesmerized by the skill being displayed before them. It was obvious to all that both boys were in their element. Bets were being taken as to which prince would falter first, though it seemed as if both could go on indefinitely. Nobody except Yevo seemed to notice that Rhoyan had not yet made a single attack maneuver. Then, in a blur of activity, it happened. The thing that had been almost inevitable from the beginning of the contest. Kai made an error in judgment. It was a small mistake. A lesser swordsman would never have even noticed, but Rhoyan had been unconsciously waiting for it. Kai, frustrated by the fact that his opponent would neither attack nor give ground, tried a move that left his sword arm unprotected for a mere fraction of a second. It was barely even a mistake, just a daring move. But Rhoyan instinctively leaped on the opportunity, going on offense for the first time. He chopped down at Kai's sword arm with both a speed and a precision that made Yevo think of a carefully trained warhorse,
that lashes out at his master's enemies and rarely ever misses his mark. The blow cracked down on Kai's wrist, causing his whole arm to go numb. Rhoyan's next blow knocked the sword out of Kai's senseless hand. Then Rhoyan's practiced sword flashed again and came to a halt, its tip resting just below Kai's chin. Rhoyan's eyes widened, and he stared at Kai in disbelief. A great hush fell over the ring, as it had just before the match began, and the two brothers stood still, breathing hard from the exertion of the fight. Then the stands seemed to erupt as everyone jumped to their feet in applause and cheers. Rhoyan stiffened and backed away slowly, shaking his head in confusion. The people in the stands stopped cheering, perplexed by the scene that was unfolding before them. Yevo understood and began to enter the ring, but he was not quick enough. Rhoyan dropped his sword, heedless of the people around him or the other students who were racing out into the arena to congratulate him. He continued to stare at Kai in shock, and then he turned and fled, fighting his way through the people who were swarming the arena. The other boys made as if to stop him, but one look at the anguish on Rhoyan's face halted their efforts as efficiently as if he had a sword and was cutting his way through the crowd. Rhoyan did not know where he was going, just that he had to get away from the people.
"Move!"
he shouted at some of the younger boys who tried to congratulate him. Wordlessly, they slipped out of his path, their eyes wide with confusion. Rhoyan suddenly found himself in his room, though he had no real notion of how he had gotten there. He vaguely remembered running, fleeing from something he could not name. Then the memory of the fight flooded back to him, and he flung himself onto his bed and sobbed. Fiora found her son in his room. She entered with a light knock, and Rhoyan looked up, his eyes red-rimmed. With a soft rustle of satin, she settled herself on the edge of his bed and laid her hand gently on his head. She did not speak or ask questions. Rhoyan shifted so that he could sit wrapped in his mother's arms.
"I wasn't supposed to win,"
Rhoyan mumbled after a long silence.
"It was just a game," Fiora said gently. "Kai isn't upset with you, if that's what you're worried about." "He's not?" "No, sweetheart. Won't you come down to the feast? Everyone wants to congratulate you." Rhoyan sniffled a bit. I just don't want...
He paused, getting his thoughts in order.
"Kai's my best friend." "I know he is, darling. I don't want him to stop being my friend."
Rhoyan craned his neck to look pleadingly into his mother's eyes. Fiora kissed Rhoyan's head.
"Your brother loves you, Rhoyan. I'm sure that will never change. I have to go see to our guests now. Please consider coming downstairs."
"Okay." Fiora hugged him tightly and left the room. Halfway down the stairs she paused, her eyes dark with unshed tears. Were they doing the right thing? Just because something was right for her country and people, did that make it right for her sons? She put a hand to her forehead. She'd been getting headaches more frequently lately. She would have to speak to Jason about that. She breathed deeply, for now she had a feast to preside over and winners to congratulate. Fiora returned to the courtyard where everyone was gathering for food.
"Rhoyan?"
Kai's voice was concerned as he poked his head round the door to his younger brother's room. When no answer came, Kai entered the room cautiously. There was a lump of blankets on the bed, and Kai walked over to the pile and looked at it quizzically. A long, shaky sigh emanated from the heap of bedding.
"Rhoyan?"
The pile of blankets shifted a little, and Rhoyan peeked out from underneath a sheet. Kai bit back the urge to laugh and sat down on the edge of the bed.
"I brought you a plate of food. It's really good. The feast is just getting started, and it looks like it's going to be a lot of fun,"
Kai said in a matter-of-fact tone.
"Sure would be a shame if you missed it."
Rhoyan sat up a bit, causing a few of the blankets to slip off his head, revealing his face. He stared solemnly at his older brother, his dark eyes red-rimmed and sorrowful. Kai found it hard to meet his younger brother's gaze. There was wisdom and compassion in the look, and Kai found it difficult to bear either. "What's wrong?" he asked. "You ran from the arena as if all your worst nightmares were chasing you."
"Maybe they were."
Kai looked at Rhoyan in confusion.
"Everyone wanted to congratulate you, and Master Yevo was going to give you the final award of the day. He's at a loss as to what he should tell people. You left us all in a bit of a mess. Why'd you run off? And why are you hiding up here? They really don't want to start the feast without you. Anyone would think you'd rather have lost the contest." "I wish I had."
Rhoyan sounded miserable.
"Why?"
Kai asked in disbelief.
"It was a great tribute to your skill. Master Yevo told me how much you've been practicing." "But I beat you."
Rhoyan's voice trembled.
"I'm not supposed to beat you."
Kai opened and closed his mouth silently, understanding slowly coming to him. He sighed and laid a hand on Rhoyan's shoulder. "I'm not mad," he said quietly.
"No?" "No. I mean, well, at first I sorta was. I hate losing, you know that. I've never lost to anyone before today. But then Master Yevo told me how hard you've been working, and I wasn't mad anymore." "Why not?"
Rhoyan almost whispered.
"Because I hadn't been practicing much. The sword's always been easy for me, so I focused a lot more on my jousting. There's no way you could have beat me if I was in top form,"
Kai boasted, playfully punching at Rhoyan's jaw. Rhoyan involuntarily flinched away from the light blow, and then he managed a weak laugh and nodded once.
"Anyone would think you were afraid of me,"
Kai said with an oddly forced laugh.
"Come on down to the feast. It's practically in your honor anyway."
"I'll be down," Rhoyan promised. "Just give me a minute." "All right, but don't be too long or you'll miss everything," Kai said. "And next week we can have a rematch when I'm not so tired."
He winked and tousled Rhoyan's hair. Rhoyan managed to nod with a tiny amount of enthusiasm, but as soon as Kai closed the door, he felt tears pricking behind his eyes. The rematch would never take place, not if he could help it. Kai bragged that he had lost because he was tired and out of practice, but Rhoyan knew better. He knew that Kai had been practicing almost as hard as he had, and he knew that losing to his younger brother bothered Kai more than he would ever admit.